For 78 years, the lake kept its secret deep beneath the ice, beneath the silence, beneath a town that chose to forget. But now, the thaw has come, and with it, a car. A rusted Mercedes, submerged since the final days of the war, no license plate, a body in uniform, a bullet to the skull. And a single, unanswered question: what was an SS officer doing here? And who was he trying to hide from? There are places in the world where time forgets to move forward, where silence settles like dust, untouched for decades. In the heart of the Bavarian Alps, where winter rarely surrenders easily, one such place had hidden a secret beneath its frozen surface for 78 years. And then, in the final weeks of a harsh winter, the thaw came not just of ice, but of memory. Before we descend further into the silence, where forgotten names echo beneath frostbitten soil and the past still waits to be found, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is more than a gesture. It's a candle lit in the fog, a hand held out in the dark. Every click tells the forgotten that someone is still listening. Every share breathes warmth into stories left cold for too long. Thank you for walking with us, step by step, into the places most have chosen to forget. A local fisherman named Matthias was the first to see it. He'd gone to the lake early, as he always did when the ice began to crack and moan, when spring whispered that it was near. But on that morning, the whisper became a scream. A jagged shape had risen from beneath the melting blue, its metal warped, paint long surrendered to rust. The outline was unmistakable. A car. A relic. It didn't take long for the authorities to arrive, nor for the word to spread through the village like fire through dry pine. The vehicle, half submerged, sat like a carcass bleached by decades. A Mercedes-Benz, its once pristine form now mottled with corrosion and decay. No license plate, no obvious markings. The windows had long since shattered, letting the black water in, and whatever story it carried settled deep into its bones. There was something unnatural about it. Not just the impossibility of its survival under the ice for so long, but the way it had gone unnoticed. Locals had skated across that lake, swum in its shallows, celebrated New Year's Eve on its shores, and yet, not once had this ghost breached the surface until now. Divers were called in, their descent into the dark water filmed only by the dim glow of headlamps and the low hum of breathing. As they approached the car, silt swirled like ash, obscuring everything in a quiet storm. Inside, the cabin was a tomb. Shreds of fabric clung to the skeleton of a seat. A leather glove, perfectly preserved, floated near the steering wheel. The silence down there felt heavier than the weight of the lake itself. What struck them most wasn't what they found but what they didn't. No luggage, no identification. Just an old Luger pistol, wedged between the front seats, wrapped in a brittle cloth, and the faint remains of what might have been a uniform, fragments of silver trim along a decaying sleeve. The news didn't report it in detail. It was, officially, an abandoned wartime vehicle. But in Meerswald, people whispered other things. Of men who vanished in 1945, of an officer who never returned, of rumors, long dismissed, that something had been lost beneath that lake. The ice had kept its promise for nearly 8 decades. It had hidden the truth beneath layers of stillness, beneath the blind eye of history. But water has memory. And as the thaw deepened, as rust met oxygen again, the past rose slowly into the present. Not in a blaze of revelation, but in silence. As if the lake had finally decided it was time. In the final days of the war, as the weight of the crumbling Reich bore down on every cobbled street and bunker-shadowed hill, the town of Meerswald waited for its reckoning. Smoke curled from the last standing chimneys, and the air reeked of burned paper, scorched leather, and something harder to name: fear. People whispered of the Allies' approach, their tanks no longer a distant thunder but a rhythm creeping closer with each sunrise. Yet among the chaos and collapse, one disappearance would echo far longer than any air raid siren. Wilhelm Kruger was not a name easily forgotten. Even before his vanishing, he moved like someone aware of history watching. Stern-faced, silver-eyed, always in uniform even when others dared to loosen their collars. A Hauptsturmführer in the SS, Kruger had been stationed in Meerswald during the last chapter of the war. Officially, he oversaw logistical transitions, an opaque title that gave him sweeping authority over transport, requisitions, and, more quietly, confiscated property. He lived alone in a manor that had once belonged to a Jewish family expelled in the early years of the war. No one saw them leave. No one dared ask. The windows remained shuttered even in summer. It was said Kruger kept a cellar full of paintings, works too beautiful for a man like him. But such things were easy to say after the fact, when legends eclipse memory. In the final week of April 1945, when the American forces were within 50 kilometers, Wilhelm Kruger vanished. One morning, his car was seen roaring through the pine-lined roads beyond the checkpoint, his greatcoat flapping like wings in the rearview mirror. That night, his house stood cold and empty. By dawn, the manor was ransacked by desperate townsfolk, scavenging what they could before the victors arrived. What they didn't take, they burned. There was no body, no farewell, just a vacuum, a silence too loud to ignore. Some said he'd escaped to Argentina, boarding a smuggler's ship out of Italy with a forged identity. Others whispered he was carrying more than documents, paintings, gold, even jewels pried from the mouths of the murdered. A few claimed he never made it out of Meerswald at all, that he was hunted, or betrayed, or punished by someone even more dangerous. The Americans asked questions, briefly, took notes, moved on. In the grand theater of the war's end, one ghost among millions was not worth the ink. No one pursued the mystery with any seriousness. And perhaps that was how the village preferred it. The past was too heavy, too sharp-edged to hold for long. But stories have a way of fermenting. They thicken in the dark. The name Kruger lived on not in records but in fragments. A photograph buried in an attic box. A gold cufflink found behind a hearth. A whispered warning to children not to walk near the lake at dusk. Time folded around the absence, turning it from fact to folklore. And so he remained an absence shaped like a man, tucked between history's pages and Meerswald's breathless winters, until the ice began to melt. The lake had kept its silence for nearly 8 decades, and even as divers broke the surface, disturbing its glassy skin with bubbles and light, it did not yield easily. Cold clung to everything, their suits, their breath, their thoughts. The water below was thick and dark, like ink drawn from old memory. The car rested half buried in silt, suspended in a kind of frozen exhale, untouched by time but slowly surrendering to it. Authorities from the regional forensic department arrived quietly, unannounced. No press, no statements. Just a series of unmarked vans parked along the edge of the woods and men in heavy coats whispering under their breath. There was something sacred about the lake now, something that felt less like a crime scene and more like a graveyard finally uncovered. The first diver's camera feed revealed it in slow, dreamlike fragments. The vehicle confirmed to be a Mercedes-Benz 770, a model reserved almost exclusively for the upper echelon of the Nazi regime, rested with eerie precision, as though it had been placed there deliberately. No visible signs of impact, no skid marks on the embankment, just stillness, preserved in a watery tomb. Inside the car, the decay told its own story. A sleeve of what had once been a military greatcoat had fused to the door panel. Its fabric, though rotten and brittle, still carried the faint outline of what might have been a silver rank insignia. Investigators handled it like it could still feel pain. They lifted each artifact slowly, reverently, like touching the last breath of a ghost. In the glove box, fragments of paper had melted into pulp, unreadable, useless. But tucked beneath the driver's seat, In a hollow where moisture hadn't fully penetrated, they found a satchel. Leather, cracked and blackened, sealed with a rusted buckle. It took hours to unfasten. Inside, a Luger pistol, its grip faded, barrel oxidized, but unmistakably lethal once. Wrapped in oilcloth, the weapon had been carefully hidden, not discarded. As if its owner had intended to return. There were no fingerprints, no identifying documents, just a lingering presence, like a scent you can't name but know too well. Forensic analysts noted the car's registration was missing. But the engine block, though partially corroded, bore a serial number that matched wartime requisition logs tied to SS transport units in southern Germany. The car had belonged to the Reich, that much was clear. But whose hands had gripped its wheel? The team worked in shifts, each descent into the lake colder than the last. One diver, a young technician named Leon, surfaced trembling, not from cold, but from something else. He spoke of the way the car faced inland, not outward, as if it hadn't been fleeing, but returning. Local archives yielded little. Wartime records in Meerswald had either been destroyed or sealed away. What remained were whispers, and now, fragments of cloth and steel rising from the deep. The lake, once feared for its darkness, had become a witness. And with every piece recovered, it became clear. This wasn't just an accident. It was something intentional. Something left behind to be found when the time was right. But the lake still held secrets. Its dead did not speak, not yet. Meerswald rests in the shadow of the mountains, nestled between frostbitten pines and forgotten roads. From above, it looks untouched, postcard perfect, with its slate rooftops and pale stone church steeple rising like a finger pointing toward heaven. But to walk its streets is to feel the weight of something unsaid. There's a stillness here, not of peace, but of long-buried unease. Even the snow falls differently, muffling sound like a shroud. When investigators arrived with questions, the town met them with polite nods and empty stares. No one said much. Some offered directions. Others offered tea. But ask about the lake, and the mood shifted like a sudden chill through an open window. "Best not to go poking at what the ice has covered," muttered an old man outside the baker's. He didn't meet their eyes. Some things freeze for a reason. There are no official records of the night in question. No names, no charges. But every town has its oral history, and in Meerswald, it's scattered like ashes, half-remembered phrases, glances exchanged between those who were children when the war ended. It was late April, they say. The air was still and heavy, the sort of quiet that feels unnatural. Just days before the Americans rolled in, a convoy, 3 trucks and a black Mercedes, was seen leaving the Kruger estate. No headlights, no fanfare. Just the distant growl of engines moving toward the lake road. Some say it was a retreat. Others claim it was a final transaction, something secret carried under tarps and behind locked crates. Paintings, maybe. Or people. But whatever the purpose, the convoy never returned. The trucks vanished without trace. And in the days that followed, a quiet understanding settled over Meerswald. Forget the night, forget the names, forget what might have happened. Helga Fuchs, now 92, still remembers the sound. "Like thunder that never reached the sky," she said, her voice brittle, her eyes staring out beyond the window pane. "We weren't supposed to look. Mama told us to go to the cellar, said it was just soldiers moving things. But it wasn't. It felt wrong." She paused. And then they were gone. No one spoke of it again. The lake itself became a sort of boundary. Children were warned not to play too close. Not because of thin ice or sudden currents, but because it was unquiet. A word that didn't belong in a geography lesson, but made its way into every warning. Over time, the whispers faded. A new generation grew up thinking it was just folklore, just stories. But the older ones never forgot. They just learned to bury it deeper. You could see it in the way they looked toward the water and then quickly away. The way they stiffened at the mention of Wilhelm Kruger, even if his name hadn't been uttered in decades. The war had ended. Lives moved on. The town rebuilt, quietly, stubbornly. But silence had a cost. And now, with the car's emergence from the lake, that silence had been broken. Meerswald had forgotten nothing. It had only chosen not to remember. Until the ice, tired of carrying history's weight, gave up its hold. In the brittle folds of an old envelope found behind a crumbling bookcase in the attic of the Kruger estate, a truth flickered to life. Ink faded, paper soft as breath, the words curved in a hand too elegant to be his. It was addressed simply, Fur W., no surname, no date, just a signature in the corner, Ilse. The letter, written in a tone more intimate than formal, spoke not of politics or war, but of longing, of shadows that stretched longer than the days, of fear, carefully hidden between lines of hope. It was the first hint that Wilhelm Kruger, the SS officer cast in iron by public memory, might have been something else, something more human or more broken. Her name had been whispered in Meerswald long ago, usually in the same breath as curses or cautionary tales. Ilse Roth, daughter of a tailor, violinist, Jewish. Before the war, she was known for her laugh, which people said could melt the frost from window panes. In 1941, she vanished. Officially deported to the East, though no one ever saw her board a train. What no one knew, at least not then, was that she had never left Meerswald at all. Hidden in the root cellar beneath Kruger's commandeered manor, Ilse lived in the margins of his life, kept out of sight, out of records, out of time. No one knows how it began. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps something messier and more dangerous. A man raised in doctrine, standing over the woman he was meant to erase, and seeing not a number or a threat but someone he could not turn away from. Through fragments of her letters, their story unwinds in hesitant sentences and coded phrases. She calls him W, never by rank. She writes of music, of books he brings her in secret, of the moth-eaten coat she wears at night, and of dreams that taste like honey and ash. He writes back in the margins of ledgers, on cigarette papers folded into her hands, always careful, always afraid. And yet, they planned, or tried to, a way out. A place where names didn't matter. But nothing in war remains untouched. In April 1945, days before the collapse, the letters stop. Her final message is smeared, almost illegible. One line is still clear. If we do not leave by Sunday, we never will. After the lake gave up the Mercedes, locals began to murmur again. Some believe she was with him in that car, that they tried to flee together, that they didn't make it far, that her bones lie somewhere beneath the ice, cradled in mud and silence. Others suggest a darker turn, that he never intended to escape with her, only to ensure she could never speak. That the same hand that fed her also pulled the trigger. No body was ever found. No record of her beyond those trembling pages. And yet, her handwriting remains. Loops and flourishes inked by a girl in love or in fear, perhaps both. In those fragile letters, the myth of Kruger fractures. He is not just a monster, nor simply a man. He is both a contradiction etched in secrecy. A war criminal with the heart of a fugitive. A captor who may have longed to be forgiven. History rarely permits its villains to be complicated. But sometimes, in the margins, they write their own contradictions. And when those pages surface, waterlogged and weeping, they tell stories that history tried so hard to forget. Buried deep in a forgotten file drawer within the Allied archives in Stuttgart, there is a document marked with a faded red stamp, transport aborted, no manifest filed. The report is brief, fragmented, almost indifferent. A convoy of 3 military trucks and 1 civilian vehicle departed from a provisional SS staging post outside Meerswald on April 26, 1945. Destination, unknown. Personnel, unlisted. Cargo, confidential. What follows is a single, chilling line. Convoy never arrived. No further documentation. The war was days from ending. Command chains were disintegrating. Orders were being burned as fast as they were written. But this convoy, this absence stood out to the archivist, reviewing the records decades later. Its departure had not been sanctioned through proper channels. Its route was off-grid. It had no radio logs, no witness confirmation from checkpoints beyond the outskirts of Meerswald. It was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost transport. Among the local accounts scattered, often contradictory, a few fragments align. Multiple villagers recalled seeing military trucks moving through the eastern pass late that night, not toward the retreating German lines, but toward the lake. No headlights, no markings, just the roar of engines and the unsettling quiet that followed. One woman, then a young girl, remembered seeing a man in a black uniform stepping out of a car near the water's edge. He stood there for a long time, she said, smoking a cigarette, staring into the trees like he was waiting for someone or something. Was it Wilhelm Kruger? The registration of the Mercedes found in the lake did not match any civilian vehicle reported missing after the war. But wartime requisitions often went undocumented, especially in the hands of those high enough to avoid accountability. Kruger had access, authority, and motive. His house had been cleared out before the Allies arrived. No furniture, no records, only scorch marks on the walls where documents had been burned. Some historians have speculated that the convoy was carrying stolen art masterworks looted from Jewish homes and museums, meant to be hidden or sold after the war. Others suggest it was gold, smuggled from eastern territories, entrusted to men like Kruger to disappear into the landscape before the Allies could seize it. A few theories go darker still, that the convoy carried not things, but people, prisoners, witnesses, liabilities, and that the lake offered the simplest solution for silence. But nothing concrete ever surfaced. No crates, no bodies, no official investigation followed. The Americans arrived in Meerswald 2 days later and found only ashes, empty vehicles, and a town eager to forget. Kruger's name appeared briefly in war crime inquiries but was dismissed due to lack of evidence. After that, he vanished from the narrative entirely. Another missing face in a sea of lost names. Even decades later, the accounts remain fragmented. Some say he fled south, crossing into Austria with forged papers, and never looked back. Others insist he never left the region, that he was double-crossed, or tried to disappear and failed. A few believe he died the moment the convoy reached the lake, that he never intended to run, only to bury everything he couldn't outrun. But truth has a strange gravity. And when the ice cracked and the lake exhaled, what was meant to stay hidden began to surface. The convoy might have vanished without record, but silence, too, leaves a trail if you know where to listen. The car was lifted slowly, delicately, like an artifact from a sunken temple. It broke the surface with a groan that seemed to echo across the lake's frozen banks, a protest or a warning. As the last of the water spilled from its windows and the wreckage settled on the tow platform, a stench, old and earthy, clung to the air. Decay and time had worked together in silence. What they had preserved, they did so not with kindness, but indifference. Inside the driver's seat, partially slumped, was what remained of a man. The bones were intact, the posture unmistakable, head tilted slightly to the left, arms resting awkwardly against the wheel. A collapsed skeleton still dressed in what little the water had spared. Epaulets long rotted, but faint silver threads still clung to the wool. The buttons bore the telltale eagle and swastika insignia of the SS. One boot had dissolved entirely, the other remained, fused to the floorboard by time and silt. When the forensic team began their work, they did so with hushed reverence. This was not merely an exhumation, it was the unsealing of a question that had lingered for generations. Beneath the skull, just behind the right ear, they found the answer to one of them. A small, clean hole, a bullet wound. Entry, but no exit. The bullet had lodged deep within the cranial cavity, corroded beyond recognition, but unmistakable in its origin. There was no sign of struggle, no defensive wounds. The positioning suggested the shot had come from within the car, or perhaps from just outside. It raised the most uncomfortable question of all. Did he pull the trigger himself, or did someone else decide his fate? The teeth, though mostly preserved, offered little help. Dental records from the SS were incomplete, often falsified or destroyed. DNA was another dead end. With no living relatives of Wilhelm Kruger confirmed, the remains could not be definitively identified. And yet every circumstantial thread pointed toward him. The car, the uniform, the pistol that lay rusted beneath the seat, its magazine empty, one round missing. But there was something else missing, something that changed the tone of the investigation entirely. There was no trace of Ilse Roth, no second set of remains, no feminine garments, no artifacts, no hair, no bones. The seat beside him was empty, clean of any personal trace. If she had been there, time had taken her more completely than it had him. Some suggested she had never entered the car at all. Others believed she had been in the convoy, perhaps in one of the missing trucks, and met her end elsewhere. A few whispered darker theories that she had been with him, that she had watched the pistol rise to his temple, or worse, that she had raised one of her own. And yet the choice of the lake still lingered as the most peculiar detail. Locals had always feared it, not for any rational reason, but because it felt wrong. The depth, the cold, the strange silences. It was not a place of beauty, but of forgetting. To drive a car into it, deliberately, was not just an escape. It was erasure, a grave of one's own making. Whatever had happened in those final moments, it had ended here, in the still black heart of Meerswald's lake. A man, a gun, and silence. And now, with the bones exposed to air once more, that silence had been broken. But the answers that emerged were murky, shaped as much by what was absent as what remained. The lake, once feared and forgotten, had become a witness. Its silence, long mistaken for indifference, now felt deliberate, like a breath held for nearly a century. In the days following the recovery of the car, the investigation slowed, but the atmosphere in Meerswald did not. The town seemed to hold its breath again, as if awaiting some verdict it could not name. Archival documents surfaced in fragments, pages browned by age, lines blotted by water damage, handwriting so faint it trembled beneath the scanner's light. They weren't declarations or confessions, but half-spoken thoughts, ledgers that didn't quite add up. Requisition forms signed under aliases, transfer orders with destinations crossed out in thick black ink. The narrative didn't unfold cleanly. It layered itself like frost. Among these relics were more of Ilse's letters, some never sent, others torn at the edges as though ripped from a diary. In one, she described the smell of pine just before snow, how it reminded her of a winter before the war, before everything had narrowed into fear. In another, she wrote, "He says silence will keep us safe, but I think silence is only safe for those who have something to hide." There was no mention of escape, only of waiting. Of hiding beneath the floorboards, listening to boots on wooden stairs and wondering if this time would be the last. And then, a shift in her tone. Hope, barely perceptible, crept in. She described a plan not in detail, but in feeling, a possibility. "When the lake thaws," he says, "we'll go. It's the only road not watched. The water's too deep to cross on foot. But in the car, we might make it. If we do not, at least the water forgets." But the water did not forget. It held everything: the gunmetal secrets, the unanswered prayers, the moment of rupture when past and present collided in the stillness. Time did not pass beneath the surface. It lingered. When the car was pulled from the lake, it brought with it not just bones and rust, but the weight of a choice made in the dark. Kruger's name, once erased, was spoken again, not as a title, but as a question. Who was he really? A war criminal fleeing justice? A man trying to atone with a single final act? Had he truly loved her? Or was she merely another victim caught in a web of power and guilt? The documents refused to answer. The letters offered no resolution. But the lake, in giving back his body, demanded the question be asked. For the people of Meerswald, this was not closure, it was confrontation, a reckoning with what they had allowed to be forgotten. For years, the story had been folded into silence, spoken of only in sighs and sidelong glances. Now, the lake had spoken back, not with words, but with presence. With steel, bone, and the smell of rot thawed from ice. There is something inherently human in trying to bury what shames us, as if silence could dissolve memory. But water, even still water, remembers. It keeps what is dropped into it. It preserves more than we intend. And when it finally releases its grip, it does so not as a gesture of cruelty but of truth. What rose from the lake was not a message, but a mirror. And in its rippled reflection, Meerswald saw not just Kruger's failure or Ilse's fate, but its own. Not a tale of escape, but of reckoning. Of what happens when a town forgets to remember, and the water, at last, remembers for them. Snow falls in Meerswald like a secret. Soft, indifferent, it blankets the village in white silence, smoothing over rooftops, burying footprints, and softening the contours of the lake until it looks untouched once more. No ripples, no wreckage, no scars, just stillness. There is no plaque by the water's edge, no memorial stone, no fresh flowers placed carefully on a stump or frozen bench. What happened here remains unnamed, and perhaps that is the only way the town can bear it. Some things are too heavy to lift, easier to let them settle back beneath the ice, to be pressed flat under snow and time, to vanish without fanfare. The investigation was quietly closed. No arrests, no charges, no grand revelations. The remains were interred under the name Unidentified Male. Estimated death, April 1945. The uniform was preserved for archival purposes. The pistol was sealed in evidence storage. Ilse Roth's name was never added to the official registry of the dead. She remains, as ever, a question. A whisper in ink, a gap between records. A presence felt, not proven. People still pass by the lake, but they do not look too long. The younger ones know only the story's outline. An old Nazi officer, a mysterious car, the lake that kept its secret for nearly 80 years. To them, it is history, not grief. A tale passed down in low voices, stripped of its weight. But for the few who remember more, those who saw the trucks, who heard the silence settle after they passed, the stillness is different. It is not peace. It is pause. The past did not return to punish or absolve. It returned simply because it could no longer stay buried. And now that it has surfaced, there is nothing left to chase. No justice to be served. No villain to confront. Only the outline of a man whose story collapsed beneath the burden of his own contradictions, and the woman who may have loved him, feared him, or both. Their ending remains as murky as the water that held it. In the quiet that follows, one begins to notice other things. The way the trees lean slightly inward, as if listening. The way the wind curls over the lake and seems to hesitate. The sound of snowflakes touching the ground, one by one, like soft punctuation on a sentence long overdue. What do we do with the things we cannot explain? We fold them into myth, we pass them on. We pretend forgetting is healing, but the lake does not forget. It waits, it watches. And then, when it chooses, it speaks. And now, it has gone quiet again. The ice has returned, the outlines have blurred. There is no music, no resolution, no final act. Just a black depth beneath white snow, and the slow, eternal breath of stillness. As if nothing ever happened. As if it never had to.